Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, we're going to respond to some questions we got in our Mailbag Monday question segment. So, what do you want to know about the Philadelphia Phillies? Well, there was a great question about Aiden Miller's future, a third base prospect for the Phils. What's going on with left field and catcher this year? And the Phillies play in the London Series, so we have someone from across the pond who wanted to know what to look for in that one. So we're going to break down all of that in today's episode of Locked On Phillies.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, folks. It's another episode of Locked On Phillies, our final episode for the month of January. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for checking us out. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So shout out to FanDuel. And today we're doing our responses to our Mailbag Monday episode. Now, normally I would have gotten this out earlier in the week, but I did an awesome crossover with Lindsey Crosby of Locked On MLB Prospects to talk about some of the names to know with the Philadelphia Phillies minor league system this year. Go ahead and check it out. It's the most recent episode on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I would love for you to give it a listen and check out some of Lindsey Crosby's work because he's an insanely bright person when it comes to who's up next in Major League Baseball. So, but Mailbag Monday got pushed a little bit. We'll get into it today now. And we got a lot of very interesting questions from folks. People are starting to jump on board with asking me questions on this. I'll try and get to as many as I can. So feel free to jump in every week. If you haven't asked the question yet, if you've been too nervous to, please do. I'm here to give you my opinion on stuff that you've been wondering for these types of episodes. So let's go ahead and start off with a question from Sean Fitzpatrick, who's a returning question asker on Twitter. So Sean Fitzpatrick asks, what is your timetable for Aiden Miller's arrival, and what does it mean for the future of Alec Bohm? Now, if you're not familiar with Aiden Miller is a young third baseman prospect for the Philadelphia Phillies. He's only 19 years old. He's never played a season above low A ball, but he is already making waves in prospect lists. He's one of the top 10 prospects at the third base position in all of the minor leagues, and he's made it onto, I believe, the top 100. He's a talented young player. He's got a lot going on at the third base position. And while we talked to Lindsey Crosby about him, and he said he doesn't have a lot of range at the position defensively, he could be a guy that shows plus power, plus hitting ability in general, and he's a top prospect at third base. So you'd imagine you're going to see him at the major league level at some point. But the Phillies have Alec Bohm there. And Alec Bohm is still a relatively young player who's still under arbitration for the Philadelphia Phillies. And he's a former first-round pick. I mean, number 3 overall. He's 27 years old. So it's not like you need the future of the third base position. You'd like to believe that that's Alec Bohm for the foreseeable future. Here's what I'll say. Just base level, even top prospects, right? If I see somebody who has not played above low A ball, I would normally say that's another 3 years before you make an impact at the major league level from that season. So 2024, 2025, I could not see, honestly, Aiden Miller being at the major league level any faster than 2026. That would be the quickest projection I would give, which means more likely than not, it'll be 2026 or 2027 even. Alec Bohm, interestingly enough, is under arbitration this year. Is under arbitration eligible next year. And he's arbitration eligible in 2026. Free agent after 2027. So you look at that and you say, that's about the time frame for Miller to come up. That's about the time frame where Alec Bohm will be able to hit free agency if the Phillies don't lock him down before that. it seems that Aiden Miller is perfectly poised to potentially be the option at third base when Alec Bohm is gone. Now, there's a lot to figure out. Like, I don't know what Aiden Miller is going to be over the course of his professional baseball career. I know he's shown tremendous potential, but here's how I would see it working out. In the next 2 years, Aiden Miller is going to progress through the minor league system. Dave Dombrowski and other members of the Phillies front office are going to assess how valuable he is. Also, Alec Bohm has to show continued growth at the major league level. If he turns into one of the great third basemen in the game, which I believe he could, he still has a ceiling as a top 10, maybe even better than that, third baseman in baseball, Alec Bohm. So that would be a guy you'd be comfortable with if he reaches that ceiling. But if Alec Bohm gets there, then what you do is you look at Aiden Miller and you say, okay, well, we got a top prospect. He's blocked at the position. Alec Bohm, 3 years from now, is going to be 30. Could still have 3 or 4 good years left. Trade Aiden Miller. Get something great at the major league level for a prospect that seems to be blocked by Alec Bohm. Or, on the other hand, if Alec Bohm seems to be heading the walk and he never really reached the level you wanted him to, bang, you have an immediate answer with Aiden Miller to slot right in there in like the 2027 season when Alec Bohm hits free agency. So actually, I don't know if it's planned or not, and it's hard to project how guys are going to move through the minor league system, but the Phillies seem to be on track to have a perfect replacement at the perfect time for the third base position if they need it. And if Alec Bohm proves that he's capable of playing here for longer than the time when he first hits free agency, which will again be in 2027, then Aiden Miller can be an awesome trade chip for the Philadelphia Phillies. So it was a great question from Sean Fitzpatrick. Sean, what I tell you is my timetable for Aiden Miller, like I broke down, 2026, 2027 at the earliest. That would be when he's arriving. And how does it affect Alec Bohm? It really doesn't. If Alec Bohm plays well enough to hold the position, they'll trade Aiden Miller. And if Alec Bohm doesn't play well enough, Aiden Miller's the answer. But I don't think they'll directly cross over at any point where they're choosing between one or the other. But I mean, they will be choosing between one or the other. But it's like, okay, well, it seems that Aiden Miller's ready to come up, but Alec Bohm is here. Do the Phillies get rid of Alec Bohm? It'll only affect a future contract for Alec Bohm. And I think that makes it as uncomplicated as possible to deal with these two third basemen, the young prospect, the young budding star in Alec Bohm, 27 years of age, as opposed to Aiden Miller, 19 years of age. And Aiden Miller, I want to say his ceiling is high when it comes to a Major League Baseball player, but I don't know. It's too early to project. And Alec Bohm was a former number 1 pick for the Phillies as far as being a first rounder. I mean, 3rd overall. Aiden Miller was as well, and we'll see how it plays out. But I don't see them, at least for the foreseeable future, affecting each other at all. And again, remember, it is January 31st, 2024. We're a long way away from the 2027 MLB season. Who knows what's going on by that point? So not something to worry about now, but just projecting out in the future, I think the Philadelphia Phillies will be absolutely fine. In fact, I think the discovery and drafting of Aiden Miller is really helping the Phillies with a potential transition further down the road. This is good, right? Because just a little aside here, in the Matt Klentak years, there were so many times where it's like, well, we're losing a player here. We have nobody to replace him. We don't know what's going on. We can't sign anybody. We can't trade for anybody. No clue how to fill these positions. With Dave Dombrowski, you can see why he's going to be a Hall of Famer, because the second you have a player go into free agency, you have an answer. The second you have a question at a position, you make a signing. The second your team is contending, you make a trade. And in the minors, you might not have the deepest system, but you have answers at spots that may become available, and you don't invest as much in the positions where you have players long-term. Bryce Harper at first, Trey Turner at short, guys like that you gave huge multi-year deals for. So very interesting how Dave Dombrowski has reworked this. I really love what he's been able to do. So hope that answers your question there, Sean. Coming up next, we're going to answer a question from Eric Heel. So, Eric, you're going to get your question answered. And it has to do with the left fielder and the catcher for the 2024 Phillies. I'll explain exactly what the question is and my thoughts on the answer as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But I got to tell you about my friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Come on, and happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate. Everybody should celebrate. From FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. There are a lot of great ones. You could bet the Gatorade color, the coin toss, all kinds of props and stuff on the Super Bowl. You've seen it before, but FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. I already told you, I'm going to be betting on the coin toss. Maybe I'll have to let you know my pick on that. But not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers, you join today, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. And you can make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I told you the next question we're going to be answering is from Eric Heel on Twitter. So Eric, appreciate you reaching out. Thank you very much for responding to my solicitation for Mailbag Monday. And Eric asks, who's going to be the everyday left fielder? And also, who's going to be the backup catcher? So a little bit of a twofer there for Eric. That's fine. I don't mind handing out 2 for 1. Let's start with the left field situation. I think it absolutely has to be Brandon Marsh. I do not think there's another logical option to play left field. I think Brandon Marsh needs to be the everyday left fielder. If you'll remember, in the postseason, I know you don't want to think back to it, but playing the Arizona Diamondbacks, Brandon Marsh was one of the few players that was a clutch hitter in the postseason in that series. While everyone else was slumping, Harper, Turner, Schwarber, Romuto, Castellanos, Brandon Marsh was having himself a bit of a series. He has proven to be relatively clutch in the postseason. He has proven to be strong defensively and offensively in the regular season. I know I spent like half of this past season, it feels like, crusading for him as a defensive outfielder. He is a plus defensive outfielder. He is a solid left-handed bat. He's shown a little bit of pop. And the issue is Rob Thompson hasn't given him enough opportunity, in my opinion, to hit off of lefties. You see a platoon type of setup with either Jake Cave or Christian Pache or however you figure it out, Rojas, Schwarber, whoever moves around the outfield because there's other pieces. Brandon Marsh has been kept away from hitting lefties. Bryson Stott has kind of had that a little bit as well in the infield, and I think it's ridiculous. I think Bryson Stott needs to play every day he's available at second base. And I think Brandon Marsh needs to play every day he's available in left field. I see Brandon Marsh as someone who's turning into a veteran right before our eyes. Nick Castellanos is already a veteran. And if you're going to play the kid in center field in Johan Rojas, I want him to know who's to his right and who's to his left every single time he goes out there. Make him worry about defense less. He can just go out there and be the athlete that he is and then focus on your at-bats. I think it would make him more comfortable. And I'd be more comfortable with the defense this team could give if it's Marsh in left and Rojas in center and Castellanos in right. I don't know who else you could argue would be the starting left fielder for this team. It's not Christian Pache. It's certainly not Jake Cave. And Simon Muzziotti, who is a minor leaguer we talked about with Lindsey Crosby in the Locked On MLB Prospects crossover episode that we did. Go ahead and check that out, if you will. It was some really, really informative stuff that even I didn't know about some of these prospects. So, but anyway, Simon Muzziotti is a guy that he's not going to come up and be a starter in the left field. Maybe he'll be a bench piece at some point this year due to injury or something. We'll see how he does in spring training. But there's really one option for left field, and it's Brandon Marsh. And he's got to be the everyday player. And I don't see the Phillies. They've been super quiet in free agency. I don't see them adding someone who could be a starter in left field. I see them adding someone who could potentially be bench depth, but not someone who could go out there and be a starter. So, long story short, to answer the first question from Eric Heel, who's going to be the everyday left fielder? Brandon Marsh, case closed. If it's anybody else, I'm going to be very upset with the Philadelphia Phillies organization. I'll be disappointed in Rob Thompson and Sam Fold and Dave Dombrowski if they choose to go with someone other than Brandon Marsh as the everyday left fielder of this team. So, that's where that stands. Let's get to the second part of Eric's question. Who's going to be the backup catcher? And this is more interesting of a convo, right? So I talked to Lindsey Crosby in yesterday's episode about Rafael Marchand, who is kind of this quad A player. If you're not sure what that means, if that's the first time hearing that term. So there's single A, double A, triple A, just to break it down. I know there's more than that, but at a base level, there's single A, double A, triple A, and then there's the majors. And sometimes you get a player who's tearing up triple A, but is not good enough for the major league team for whatever reason. Maybe they're blocked by a player. Maybe they just don't translate to the major league game, but they play well in AAA. They're right on the cusp and they can't seem to get over. And you call those players quad A players. It's almost like if there was another league between AAA and MLB, they would play in that one. That's kind of what Rafael Marchand has become. He's been in the organization for a minute now. JT Realmuto has had him blocked, and Logan O'Hoppe kind of covered him when it comes to prospect rankings because O'Hoppe, before he was traded to the Angels at the trade deadline, not this past season, but the year before, was the top catching prospect for the Philadelphia Phillies. Now Marchand is sitting there as the next guy behind Garrett Stubbs. And he'll be in camp. You'll see what he does as far as a catcher is concerned. But I don't really see the Philadelphia Phillies making a move to put Marchand on the major league roster over Garrett Stubbs. Stubbs doesn't have an option, so you can't send him to the minors. He would have to clear waivers. I imagine someone else would pick him up. And even not, like, what are you going to do with Garrett Stubbs in the minor leagues? This is a guy who's been your backup catcher for 2 years now on 2 successful postseason teams. He's beloved in that locker room. And I see flashes of ability, but this past year was a rough one for him. Not a lot of opportunity because JT Realmuto plays so much, but in the minimal opportunity Garrett Stubbs got this past season, he wasn't very good. So I look at that and I say, maybe it is time to start considering another backup catcher. The other thing we've talked about is JT Realmuto's getting older. You're going to have to start playing him less. Try and keep his career longevity as long as possible. And that doesn't include playing 140 games a catcher every year. He's going to need some days off. And last year we saw a drop in production for Realmuto. Could that have been because of age becoming a factor? Absolutely. So if Realmuto's getting older, that means the backup's going to play more, which makes the backup position more important. If I don't trust Garrett Stubbs to have a better year than he did last year, wouldn't it make sense that you'd bring in a different backup catcher? I mean, yes, I guess it would. So there is a world where Marchand at some point comes up and plays with the major league team. You hope it's not because of injury, because if Realmuto goes down, this team is in trouble. There's not a lot of depth at that catcher position. And again, Garrett Stubbs in his time this past year did not really show that he could be the everyday catcher for this team. So you need Realmuto to be healthy. But if, let's say, Stubbs gets some extended time because JT's out for a week or whatever, and he looks awful, I could see the team potentially considering Marchand to come up and get some innings and say, hey, man, it's time to figure out what we're going to do in the post-JT Realmuto era, because that time is coming. Realmuto he doesn't have a position he can shift to because Harper plays first base. He doesn't have another 10 years of catcher. He probably doesn't have another 5 years of catcher. He's probably got another good 2 or 3 years before he really drops off a cliff physically, and that's no fault of his own. It's just how time works. And that's something the Phillies are going to have to start to prepare for, because I don't believe they're prepared totally for another opportunity at that position. You remember I said with the Aiden Miller conversation, it seems that Dave Dombrowski has put the Phillies in a place where their farm system might not be deep, but they have answers at positions they need to. Catcher's not one of those. So I think a signing could be coming sometime in the next year or two for a true bona fide catcher to eventually replace JT Realmuto. Something to keep an eye on. But if I had to answer, I don't think Marchand's going to start the season at the major league level. So Stubbs will be your backup catcher. JT obviously will start. That could be subject to change during the season. So that's my answer to your question there, Eric. And we'll round out with a very interesting question from George next. And George comes to us from over in England, jolly old England. So I'll tell you what he's asking about and why he's interested in the Philadelphia Phillies specifically this year as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But let me first tell you about eBay Motors, right? Passion, drive, and patience are what brings home the winning trophy. And it's also what keeps your automobile alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They got superchargers, they got roof racks, they got exhaust kits, they got LED headlights, and much, much more, whatever you need, whatever you're into. Maybe you want to add more speed, power, or style to your vehicle. Well, eBay Motors has got you covered. They got over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay, I should say, guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. See, now I love eBay Motors. I feel bad that our next responder, George Hant, who tweeted at us, is from England. So that whole guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers thing, unfortunately, does not apply to George. Now, George comes to us from Manchester, England, and he asks, what can we expect from the Phillies both on and off the field at this year's London Series? And this is a fun thing to talk about because I know that the Philadelphia Phillies have some fans abroad, and the UK has some fans of American sports, and some of them become Philadelphia fans. And it seems like George is a fan of the Philadelphia Phillies. So I want to give George my thoughts on the London Series. Now, if you're not familiar with the London Series, it started a couple years back, and they send two teams over to play a short set over in London. Normally, it's like a 2-game series, and they play over there. It's trying to expand the game to Europe more. The World Baseball Classic did a good job of that this past year, and I know the Yankees and Red Sox have played in it before. To tell you about it this year, the London Series is back. The Mets, the Phillies. It's a 2-game series on June 8th and 9th. So right in the middle of summer, here's the upside for folks like George who want to go watch the team, right? First off, the game is in June. So that means you're probably going to get a chance at the Kyle Schwarber home run ball. He's unbelievable in June. The Phillies have had one of the best June records over the past 2 years of any team in baseball. So they should be playing good baseball at the time. Last year was the Cardinals and the Cubs, by the way. But you should expect a series where the Phillies look really good. The Mets are not going to be good this year. They're still kind of rebuilding and figuring out what they want to do up there. So the Phillies should be playing a team that they're favored against at a time of the schedule where they historically have played well with these type of players. So the on-the-field stuff should look really good for the Philadelphia Phillies. As far as off the field, I'm not totally sure what to expect from them over there. But here's what I will say. I know that Chase Utley still does a lot with the Philadelphia Phillies organization. He's around. The players are familiar with him. He hasn't completely gone off into hiding. And he's also been doing a lot of work with the ambassador program for the MLB over in London. He did some work over there. I think, honestly, he did some stuff with the London Series last year. So the fact that the Phillies are going to be over there, I'd be surprised if he wasn't involved. So I'd look at potentially his involvement, and he'll get the Phillies involved in some stuff off the field over there. The Phillies were a team. They played in the Little League Classic this past year in Williamsport. And you saw them going to a game, talking to the kids. They're just a great group of guys who are not afraid to get out and talk to people, shake hands, kiss babies, enjoy their time. And I imagine they'll be very visible in their 2 days over there in London. So that's what I'd be looking forward to if I had a chance to go to the London Series. And maybe some of you stateside are planning on going over there to the UK to watch that. But George, who comes to us again from Manchester, England, it sounds like you got a great 2-game series to go to, especially if you're rooting for the Philadelphia Phillies, which I'm assuming you are. So hopefully that was a great answer to everyone's questions. We're going to continue to do this weekly, so I'll put out tweets at the end of every week for you to respond with more questions like this. And that's fun to answer a couple questions from the fan base. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for checking us out. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And I will talk to you next time on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.